So whenever you have a reduction in the microorganism population, you almost always see a reduction in the immunity of the plants. This was well demonstrated by Sir Albert Howard and Lady Eve Balfour with extensive research where they raised plants on different qualities of compost, and they found that the poorer the quality of the compost and the less organic matter in the compost, the more easily the plants got diseases that were common to those plants. Okay, now there's lots more I could tell you, I just don't have time. So there's many beneficial microorganisms. So you have what are called predatory fungi. So here's a picture right out of Lady Eve Balfour's book, the Hawley Experiment. It's called The Living Soil, and the Hawley Experiment is the longest ever run scientific experiment comparing organic farming to conventional farming, and looked at the studies of organic feeding on animals. I'm sure they probably have several copies of the book in here, I would imagine. It was published, I believe, in '46. And it was a 21-year study on organic food and organic farming, and it showed hands down there was no comparison. I mean, over and over and over and over again, right? One of the images she shows here, this is an eelworm, and an eelworm, for example, is a common potato parasite. And the potato plant is what's called a mycorrhizoformer. Okay, so mycorrhiza means fungal filament. Myco, fungus, mycotoxin, fungal toxin, rhiza, runner, former, so it means that this type of fungus forms runners, okay? And what these mycorrhizoformers do is they send their little filaments up the plant roots. So just like if a doctor wants to look at a man's prostate, he'll put a camera through the end of your penis and have a look inside of you, or if they want to look in your bladder. So if you've ever had that done to you, fortunately I haven't, but many of my patients have told me interesting stories about that. Well, it's not quite so painful when the fungi do it. They actually are very powerful organisms. The funguses excrete extremely powerful acids that liquefy rock. So they actually take rocks and they use the acids of the fungus to convert it into liquid minerals, and then they pump the minerals up into the plant and feed the liquid minerals to the plant. Here what you see is that they're also predatory fungi. So each plant that's symbiotic with its fungi, the funguses actually set up a defense mechanism in what's called the rhizosphere, or the root space. Rhizosphere means root space. So in the root space of a plant, and 85% of all plants are mycorrhizoformers. That means 85% of all the plants that human beings can eat have friendly relationships with funguses in the soil, and the funguses actually loop their filaments. So there's a fungal filament, these are fungal filaments, there's a fungal filament there, and there you see other parts of the fungus, and what it does is it loops itself. So you know what a little life preserver looks like at the swimming pool, right? And they throw it to you. Well, the fungus makes these little loops like that, and the funguses excrete extremely powerful adhesives, like tape, like glue. And so what they do is they leave these little loops all over, and the eel worms and the other predatory parasites that go after the plant have to get through this net that they create out of their filaments. So when the worm swims through, he gets stuck because there's glue, adhesive on there. And then guess what? This is cool. It was worth reading this book just to find this out. Check this out. You see, there's the worm's nervous system and digestive system. Can you see that? There's just two tubes. Now come down here. Look at all the stuff in there now. What happened? See how many tubes there is in that one? That's because when the fungus catches a predatory parasite that's going after its plant, remember the acids that they use to melt rock? They attach to the body of the parasite, they burn a hole through it, and guess what they do? They eat the internal organs and they feed it to the plant. You know what's so cool about that? vegetarians have no idea that plants are highly carnivorous. And this is a scientific fact. And Sir Albert Howard and Lady Eve Balfour even tested the theory. They made vegetarian compost, and then they made 3 grades of compost. One with just animal hair, one with just blood droppings, and one with table scraps, like leftover steak bones and chicken and all that stuff. And then they raised plants on each grade of compost, and then they took barrels of the parasites known to attack those plants and covered the plants with parasites. And the plants that were raised on vegetarian compost had the highest rates of disease by far, and the plants fed table scraps had almost no impact from the parasites at all. The parasite, it was almost like they were invisible. The parasites didn't even touch them. They had about a 3% loss, which is what an excellent organic farmer gets anyhow. So what they showed, bar none, is that plants are highly carnivorous and love protein, and they don't have mouths with teeth, so the funguses do the eating and feed them. And the funguses are smart. They go after the organs. Why? Because in any animal, that's where the nutrition's at. What you know of as steak and all that stuff, that's the poorest quality nutrition in any animal. Weston Price showed you can make animals sick, but you can make lions sick by feeding them steak. You got to feed them organ meats, okay? So what you see is that the funguses actually feed the plants the best of the animal nutrition available to them right out of the ground. And so there's really no such thing as a vegetarian. That's just a bunch of baloney, okay? And I have plenty of them that come to me as patients with diseases, and I have about a 98% success rate of converting vegetarians back to meat eaters, because I can explain it to them in a way they've never heard it done before. And I've investigated the spiritual aspects of vegetarianism as well, and I can chop suey that whole thing to death. I'm a dangerous guy if you're a vegetarian. I'm like a samurai warrior waiting for you, armed with facts. So if you go to my website, paulchek.com, in the articles section, there's 2 articles, Vegetarianism Inside Out Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1 looks at the physiological aspects. What's the impact of a vegetarian diet on the human body physiologically? Part 2 looks at the spiritual aspects, and I showed that every one of the commonly given arguments for vegetarian is absolutely incorrect, even spiritually. And I look at world religion and I break it down. I'll let you read the articles if you're interested, but I've gotten emails and calls from doctors all over the world that said those are the best articles I've ever read on vegetarianism, and I use them in my practice all the time because you hit all the key points. So it comes down to, do you want to be healthy or do you want to die? Okay?